are live. Welcome back. This is episode number 29 of Calibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. Back at it again solo. Monday sit rep, basically. Just some house cleaning stuff. If you guys are listening to this, you're listening on the YouTube page. If you could subscribe, that helps me tremendously. Also, if you could like the video, that helps me. It's free for you to do. It takes 2 seconds, and it just is something you can do to support my work. But yeah, let's just get right into it. We had what I'm going to call a phantom missile strike last night. There was a bunch of buzz about Russian aircraft taking off into the air. There were estimated between 15 and 20 strategic aircraft. So this would include Tu-95s and Tu-160s. The Tu-95 being the Bear, the old prop bomber, which is very well positioned to launch standoff weapons such as cruise missiles, and the Tu-160, which is the state-of-the-art supersonic bomber that the Russian military employs. So these aircraft were up in the air on what we call BareNet, which is the communication system for the strategic air force of the Russian Federation. They had gone into silent mode, which usually means that they're about to attack. They were heading to staging positions over the Caspian Sea and over mainland Russia. And Ukrainian sources who I go through, because the Ukrainian sources, when it comes to minute by minute shot calling on Russian missile strikes, is actually very accurate. They have, unlimited connections throughout the country. So they get all of the footage, they get all of the information. They have they have their ear to the ground basically when it comes to this stuff. So everybody goes off of Ukrainian sources. Because they're the ones who announce it. The Russians don't announce that they're about to start a missile attack. The Ukrainians do. So the Ukrainians were saying 17 was the number that was given, but I think it was probably less than that, probably 10. Strategic aircraft were in the air. They went to their launch points, and they were supposed to fire around 100 missiles was what most of the Ukrainian sources were saying. And that's just an estimate based off of the carrying capacity of these vehicles. There were also 9 surface vessels with missile launch capabilities in the Black Sea, and 2 submarines that were all out of port. So to the Ukrainians, this looked like the preparations for a massive attack, which it is exactly what it looks like, and that's what everybody thought. When it ended up coming around, this air raid went on for about 5 hours, possibly 6 hours. They struck. I'm sorry. The missiles never really. So this is kind of weird to explain. We have Ukrainian numbers. They say they shot down 15 of 18 missiles. So what they're confirming to me is that only a very small number of missiles were launched with this raising of multiple, pieces of aviation. This indicates to me that this was a reaction test. They sent these. They sort of did a dry run of a large-scale attack to see how Ukrainian air defense would respond. I bet they were mapping the air defenses. I have suggested that electronic warfare was also incorporated into this, as well as decoys. These missiles might have been decoys. The 18 missiles that were shot down could have just all been decoys. We didn't really see any strikes. We did see a lot of very, very cheap, large drones that were shot down by the Ukrainians as well during this whole thing. We had reports of massive Garin launches, which Garin 2, which is the kamikaze drone from Iran. But they never showed up either. So we had this phantom missile attack that occurred, uh, and I think what it did was it gave the Russians a full picture of the current air defense situation in Ukraine. I think that this is preparation for a actual attack, a full scale attack. They now have the Ukrainian response time, probably what assets the Ukrainians have, and where the Ukrainians are expecting the Russians to come from, and what they're expecting them to strike. So if this is what it was, this is just my speculation, just based off of the uh, perceived investment in this operation. 17 strategic aircraft and 11 ships is a big, big undertaking to launch 18 missiles and have almost no like video or photo evidence of any results. We don't even have rumors of, we had some explosions in some areas. We had air defense that worked, which is half reliable for some of those explosion claims. So, if an air defense missile hits something or goes off in over the sky of Dnipropetrovsk, for example, media outlets might claim that an arrival occurred in that area, but in fact, it probably didn't, and it was just air defense um, working out on targets. So the 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 hype, I think, came from the fact that everybody has been a little bored. Everybody's waiting for a counteroffensive. Everybody's waiting for Bakhmut to wrap. There's just this stagnation kind of in the information space right now, and people get restless and they want to have something happen. I mean, this is a form of entertainment, whether we like to think about it or not in that way. If you spend a lot of time doing this, the slow times where you don't have anything to analyze can be just dreadful. And so I think it was a combination of multiple things. I think it was a test. I think the Ukrainians thought it was real and they reacted in that way. And then I think the more pro-Russian side of the coin picked up on that fear and carried it further than it needed to go. Um, it was very interesting though to see how the Ukrainians you know preemptively put up air raids for hours on end just because of their expectation of this thing. So they definitely thought it was real. Their numbers that they were giving, where they were saying 100 to 200 missiles in this salvo, was not an unreal estimate. And I think it's very, very clear that the Ukrainians are expecting a Russian missile attack of, you know, extremely large size within the next couple weeks. Um, and that should really go to show you where the conflict is headed. It looks like no sign of peace negotiations. It's just everybody's getting ready for the next fighting. So, um, there was another strike earlier in the day that I also wanted to talk about in the Dnipropetrovsk oblast, um, in uh, Pavlograd. And this was this strike caused a massive explosion. At first, I thought it was air defense, which it still could have been. The Russian claims, not from the Russian MOD, I don't think they've said anything about it yet, but the pro-Russian information space claims are that it was, an air defense battery, because what was struck and the explosion that occurred was very reminiscent of solid rocket fuel detonating. Which is what is used in air defense missiles. So particularly the S-300, when it goes off, it looks like a bunch of flares kind of being sent off in different directions and burning really hot and bright. And that's what happened in Pavlovgrad, but to the nth degree. It was a massive explosion rivaling, I mean, it's basically bigger than most any explosion you've ever seen. Smaller than Beirut, but in that same category of destruction and size. And what was claimed to be hit by the pro-Ukrainian side is a old ICBM chemical plant that produced rocket engine fuel. So this, I mean, that makes sense to me. That lines up. I also think that there was probably a secondary target. They talked about 8 explosions before the actual main blast, which means that, and from their claims, it was Guarantees that did this. It wasn't missiles. So this whole thing to me feels like more happened, and we're just not ever going to really know until later on, if it ever comes out, because there have been no pictures from the scene, which is extremely suspicious to me. I would think that there would be more photo evidence if there was nothing of value there, um, because the Ukrainians will use anything like that to their PR advantage to make Russia look like, the aggressor, the bad guy, the Nazi, whatever you want to say. That's their goal, is to keep up this narrative of, Russian aggression, Russians evil. It's yeah. So they didn't do that. We haven't seen any pictures, which immediately sets off my bullshit radar. I don't like that. And it doesn't it what it means to me is that either something important was hit in the factory, or something outside of the factory on the railroads that are very close to this factory were hit, and that was either a secondary consequence of this strike, or you know, the primary cause of the strike actually did significant damage to the AFU in one way or another in this region. It is a major supply hub. It's very centrally located. So, to say that nothing was hit and it was, a completely pointless strike makes almost zero sense to me. It doesn't add up. Either the Ukrainians were doing something in this factory, or using the factory to produce something for the war effort. And when no pictures get posted, that kind of reconfirms that assumption that I'm making. But only time will tell. We really don't know. It was a huge explosion and a massive fire, though, that lasted for hours and hours and hours through the night and into the morning. We've also had some slight clarification on the S-300 strike. It looks like a total of 4 S-300 systems were destroyed with different Lancet strikes. We can't really tell fully if they were fully capable S-300 launcher systems, or if some were decoys and some were real. One was definitely real. But the others, it's hard to tell. I am going to go ahead and say that they are probably real because of how they were being defended with short-range air defense. You had Gepards and medium-range air defense Buk in the area that were also targeted and destroyed. So this was a very significant AD loss, and it's very significant because it's coming up against the counteroffensive, where they need these air defense assets to cover staging and, the upcoming offensive. And now those have been lost. And just to finish up with today's sitrep, moving over to Bakhmut, where we're seeing the most progress, still, well, not the most progress, I guess, but the highest intensity fighting and the main focus of the conflict is still in Bakhmut. We have rumors now that the AFU are retreating to basically the last road in town. And that means that they are most likely abandoning the quote unquote citadel, the commie block of apartments in Bakhmut that is an absolute fortress, but is now a ruined hellscape that the Ukrainians can't really maneuver very well in, and the Russians have already breached it. So once they're inside of a, a fortified area, that area is not doesn't work as well for fortification anymore. Now it's room to room urban fighting that can get extremely messy and is very fluid and liquid, and can result in losses that aren't necessary, and captures that aren't necessary. So the Ukrainians pulled back out of there. It looks like Bakhmut is about to be completely liberated, because once this last little line of defense falls, the salient will back up past Kromove and Ivanivsky towards Chesav Yar. So that's a pretty major development. They were planning a last stand there, and Russian aviation and artillery, I don't think, really allowed that last stand to come to fruition. And that this could mark the end of the Battle of Bakhmut. We do have significant rumors from multiple sources that I trust, both pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian, talking about an immediate, and I stress this, immediate counteroffensive between the 2nd and the 4th in the Bakhmut direction. We'll see if that ends up happening. I still don't think the weather is particularly good in Bakhmut right now. I don't think the ground conditions are particularly good, but if the Ukrainians want to hold the city, it is now do or die. If they want to have any chance of retaining any sort of bridgehead within the urban conglomeration, they need to go like yesterday. And they've been just unable to, because of the poor weather conditions that have continued. One thing that I have come to the realization over the past couple months is that the Ukrainians, much like the Russians in the winter, are appearing to be missing a lot of their timings, and the Russians are now hitting their timings, and they're in stride, just passing up the Ukrainians on the battlefield. We're seeing this with the air defense systems that were lost. The Ukrainians are moving these systems closer to the front to, protect their forced offensive that they're going on. And they're losing these because Russian Lancet and glide bombs have really come into full combat effectiveness. Their production is maxed out. Well, not maxed out, but their production is at the point where we're seeing probably across the whole front 40 to 50 Lancet strikes a day. Lancets are now moving from, artillery pieces and self-propelled guns to less valuable targets like APCs, light vehicles, infantry, Starlink systems, fortifications. The targets are just adapting and changing as the weapon system becomes more readily available on the front, and there's more people who know how to use it. Same with the glide bombs. The glide bombs have been a game changer that is forcing the Ukrainians to do things differently, and is causing significant casualties because of the inability of the Ukrainians to prevent these weapons from being used. They can't take out aviation from that range. And so, the Russians are really just kind of coming into their own right now. If you looked at the Russian army a year ago and the Russian army now, it is a completely different beast. I think that the West messed up large on this on this bet, because they thought that the Russian economy was going to collapse and then they wouldn't have to deal with the Russian military. And now you have a Russian economy that has stabilized, is independent, and you have a fully functioning Russian army that's just ready to go, which is a very dangerous thing. And when you have a country that has invested so heavily in the military, they tend to want to use it, especially when they're coming off of a victory, which is what it's looking like is going to happen in Ukraine. And there are some people that'll say, "Oh, the Russian army has taken so much damage." I would just recommend you go and listen to the hearing that just occurred with the head of the European Command. I can't remember his name. It starts with a K. but he basically said that the Russian military has not degraded significantly in any way, in any capacity since the beginning of the SMO. The commitment that the Russian military made to Ukraine from the beginning was relatively small compared to the overall capabilities of the Russian military. The Russian military was not fully involved because it wasn't a war; it was an SMO. Only 180,000 soldiers, not the best equipment was being sent in. So the Russian military has not degraded. In fact, it has improved significantly. Communications have improved. Weapon systems have improved. New weapon systems have improved. Technologies have improved, like drone technology, and relationships are improving. So Russia is coming out on top right now, and Ukraine just is continuing to hit these bad timings where they're having uh, distrust beginning to foment and lack of support in the West with the papers, the classified papers that were just released. Even if they're not real, they give credence to all of the people in the US who have been saying that Ukraine is a mess and we don't need to be there. We don't need to be wasting money on it. It is just what the Biden administration wants. It's not what the American people want. So that whole voice is now gaining a lot more momentum in the United States. You're seeing people like, Tucker Carlson, who's very popular with the Republicans. You're seeing uh, a lot of people. Elon is even starting to, come out and say things and approach the conflict differently and being less not, I guess, not supportive, because I don't think he was ever really supportive, but more pragmatic in his approach to the conflict. Um, and this, so that is one major timing that the Ukrainians are missing. They are starting, the support is starting to wane, which hurts morale greatly. When people start talking about not giving you weapons that you need to fight, that is definitely not what people on the front line want to be hearing, and that's not what people who are supporting the war effort domestically in Ukraine want to be hearing either. Um, Another timing that they're missing has been the incredibly wet spring. The Russians had an incredibly mild winter, which means that the ground didn't freeze the way it needed to, and it meant that the Russian movement during the winter wasn't as strong as it could have been. Uh, Although I don't think that the Russians were really planning on moving much in the winter, as their mobilization wasn't completed yet. They were still training. They were still dealing with Soledar Bakhmut. So there wasn't a real need to go and, go on the offensive and make a bunch of moves, which is why, the Ukrainians came out and said, oh, look at what the Russians are doing. They're getting ready. They're going to go on the offensive, this, that, and the other. And then they never went on the offensive. And then the Ukrainians said, oh, look at how the Russian offensive failed. And it's just not based in reality, but that's okay. It is what it is. And everybody will start to see very quickly which army is degraded, which army is having ammunition issues, which army is having motivation, manpower issues. It's all going to come to the surface very quick. And I think the shock of all of these missed timings and all of these unfortunate events that have happened to the AFU and Ukraine in this conflict are going to become wildly present, and in everybody's face very soon. And it's going to be a shock to a lot of people, because a lot of people have been lied to for a very long time. It's no different than Iraq. It's no different than Vietnam. It's no different than any of the lies that the US government tells. It's no different than any lie that any government tells. I don't want to make this seem like I just hate the US. China lies, Russia lies, every country lies. That's what they do. It's what they have to do. So the US's lie is going to start unraveling now. And with the US, sphere of influence in the Middle East being almost completely lost, the sphere of influence in Africa being lost, and an incredibly weak Europe, America is just coming out the big loser. And sooner or later, that support to Ukraine is gonna be cut. And when it does, you know, which I believe will be after a failed counteroffensive, uh, it's gonna be it's gonna be a wake up call to a lot of people. Um, But yeah, that's the set rep for today. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, guys, please. I would like to start doing this for my living, and one way I can do that is by producing content on YouTube. So, share it if you can. And I appreciate you all for listening. I'm just a guy with dumb opinions, but I try to put them together in a meaningful way to make the information digestible for everybody. So, thank you so much and have a great day.